Cordray. I'm your candidate, I hope your candidate for governor. And if I'm not at the beginning of my speech, I hope to be by the end of my speech. I'm running this year with Betty Sutton. She's my lieutenant governor candidate, and she is terrific. If you have not met her, she's a three-term congresswoman from Northeast Ohio. Before that was in the General Assembly, and when she has not been in public office, she's been a labor lawyer representing working people to try to make sure they're treated fairly in the workplace. Sometimes people lose their jobs wrongly and help them get their jobs back, help the terms and conditions be what they should be. That's her background. My background is that I grew up in Central Ohio, went through the public schools, went away and did my education in Chicago and over in England for a couple years, worked in Washington for a few years, then came back and got involved in law and public service. I taught at the Ohio State Law School for about 13 years, and I was in the General Assembly. I was Ohio's first Solicitor General. I later was elected as County Treasurer, so I've been in local government. I was the State Treasurer, so I've managed the finances for the state. And by the way, did that during the financial crisis, which was no easy thing. And then I was Attorney General right after the financial crisis, and a big part of what we did was go after Wall Street to get money back for Ohio's retirees. And we brought back $2 billion from Wall Street for Ohio's retirees and our pension systems here, and I was proud of that work. Then, that's right. I have found that people like nothing better than getting money back in their pocket.
Amen.
That was wrongly taken from them, and they thought they would never see again, and that nobody would care enough to ever make an effort to get it back for them. So I did the same thing then in Washington. Elizabeth Warren had seen my work here. She recruited me, and President Obama then appointed me to head a new agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And our job was to help people in the financial marketplace when you're dealing with some of these big banks and big mortgage companies and big car loan operators, to make sure people are treated fairly, because often they're not. And people take advantage of you, and what do you do about it? You're going to get a lawyer and sue them? Maybe sometimes people do that, but a lot of times they just have to kind of mutter about it and absorb it. And we thought we could do better. So we created a way to have a voice for people to complain to us, and 1,300,000 people filed complaints with us on things that they thought that they had been mistreated, and we worked to fix those things and got money back for people, and it fixed other things too, like if debt collectors were harassing you all hours of the day or night. I don't know if that's happened to some of you. It happens to surprisingly many people in our society, and sometimes they're just dead wrong about whether you owe anything in the first place, or sometimes they have the amount wrong, or they're going after family members, or whatever it is. A lot of those things are against the law, but you don't stop it until somebody steps up and helps you stop it. Or credit reports. People get things on their credit report that are not correct, and suddenly that's in the way of you getting a car loan or getting a mortgage. And getting those things fixed can be very vexing, because it takes sometimes months of effort, sometimes years, and each time you call them, they can't remember that you called them before, and it's not the same person. You know how it is. So we would get a lot of those things fixed for people that matter. And in cases where we weren't satisfied with how they did, we brought enforcement actions against every one of the big banks, every one of the large financial companies. And over my time there, we put back $12 billion back in the pockets of Americans. And I always said, who are the consumers that we were representing? It's everybody in this room, it's everybody in this state, it's everybody in this country. We're all consumers. So that's who we were looking out for, was the people. And our job was to stand on their side and see that they were treated fairly. And Elizabeth Warren and I became close friends. She's a strong supporter of mine in this race. And President Obama, I had a chance to speak to him before I left Washington and get his blessing to come back here and start in on this project, which is going to be a project I hope you will all help me with, because it's a big project to win back the state of Ohio. But we're intent on doing that this year. And we did have a debate last night in Toledo, so got a chance to make the case. What I found was all the other candidates seemed to be attacking me. I always think that's a good sign. Don't get too ruffled. Don't feel you need to bite back on everything, although sometimes you do need to fight back. But just make your case. And in my case, the case I'm making is that Betty Sutton and I are the right team for Ohio. We are both strong leaders who have a strong track record of results, and that's what we're going to do this year. Again, our focus is on what we call the kitchen table issues. These are some of my friends in the labor movement that I was speaking to before I came over here. And they might be hungry. You guys get lunch? Okay, all right. Anyway, Betty and my focus is on what we call the kitchen table issues, the issues that matter as we go around the state and hear from people and their families, the things that worry people. So access to affordable health care, getting the education and training that people need and their children need to be ready for the workforce and be able to go back into the workforce if they have to lose their job and have to be retrained. Spreading out economic opportunity more equitably around the state. You know, we've had an economy for 20 years, maybe 50 years now, where more and more wealth is concentrated in the top 1%. More and more income is concentrated in the top 1%. We have to spread that out. And part of it is spreading it out geographically in Ohio. We have all these middle-sized towns around the state, places like Lima, places like Zanesville, places like Chillicothe, that don't get their fair share of care and credit from state government. And that's something that I would like to change as your governor. And most of all, it means jobs and the kind of economic opportunity that can build strong communities. And I know you have a strong mayor here. I've known him for a long time. And he focuses all the time on what he can do to bring more opportunity to Lima and to keep what we have. And by the way, also to take what we have here and see how we can help it grow. I mean, I get agitated sometimes thinking about how the state does economic development. It's all about trying to bring things in from out of the state. I'm fine with that. Well, we got a lot of good things going on in the state. A lot of small businesses would be happy to grow if they could just get the support they need at the right time in the right way. That's something we did when I was state treasurer. We had a low interest loan program where we could get timely capital to businesses when they needed it to buy this new piece of equipment or maybe to shift their factory around. I remember one time it was just flipping the factory around on the property so they could use more of the property and they could add 30, 40 jobs. It was stuck the way it was before, and they needed some help to do that. So if we understand those things, our homegrown businesses that are not looking to leave, they just need some help to grow. That's a big part of what we can do in this state. So improving our educational system, stopping these for-profit charter schools. We've had this scandal in state government. We've got this ECOT that just threw 13,000 students back into the pool because they went belly up. They $70 million missing that we're never going to get back. And there ought to be criminal liability for some of these people, if you ask me. So, these are problems that we can fix, and we can take a different direction, and it's time for that. We just had, the current governor had his last State of the State address earlier this week. Everybody recognizes that the book is closing, the chapter is finished, time to pass the torch, and it's time for us to be talking about what we're going to do for the future of the state. And I'm glad to have the chance to be here in Lima today to do this with you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to deal with those. And otherwise, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to eat. Yes, sir.
While the purpose behind the governor's Jobs Ohio is a pretty good idea, the legislators stepped in and said, oh no, they're not subject to public records for how they're spending our dollars. How do you anticipate correcting that?
So to me, if you're talking economic development, which means we're taking people's money and figuring out how we're going to try to grow the economy in the state, it needs to be transparent because the people are entitled to know what's being done with their money, right? My problem with Jobs Ohio is, for all I know, it may be doing some good things, it may be doing some bad things. I don't know what it's doing. That's my problem, right? Supposedly they have a return on investment formula, and if so, that's great. But what is the formula? Are they meeting it? Are they meeting it with this project? Are they meeting it with that project? We have no idea.
Well, the answer is trust us.
That's right. So, once I get to be governor, I guess I'll know all of what they're doing. But my view is that you all are entitled to know what they're doing. And, there's a balance here. You can't divulge all these secret plans, as you're trying to compete with other states, et cetera. But it feels to me they've gone way over toward that end of the spectrum. And the public's right to know and the public's right to hold them accountable has been diminished to a point of unacceptable negligibility. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Other things? Yep.
Do you believe that to balance the budget, you need to take from the cities and from the counties in order to take the debts that the government was paying for?
Yeah. Yeah,
state was paying for
I
it.
think that's a great question, and I'll say this, and we have the mayor and the finance director in this room. It is wrong what the state legislature in Ohio has been doing now for many years, which is that they're telling local governments you have to tighten your belt so that their books look better, and they've got a stuffed full rainy day fund, and they brag about that, and they want to give all these tax cuts back to people, which doesn't really come to you and me, it comes to the richest Ohioans, and that's not helping us make progress in the state. I call it the war on local governments, and I know Mayor Berger has joined the Mayor's Alliance to push back on this and to say to them, you know, this is not fair, this is not right. We had a deal in this state 80 years ago when we created the sales tax, and the sales tax was, you know, a tax on all the things we buy, and the deal was that the state would collect that, but it would, a share of it would come back to local government. That was the local government fund. And that deal was honored, that promise was honored for 80 years until this administration, which has broken that promise and has now taken, I think it's up to about half the local government fund is being siphoned off to the state. And that makes them look good. It makes local government look bad. And by the way, then you get things like the state auditor writing his reports about the cities that are in financial distress. Well, if you're reaching into my pocket and taking my money, I'm going to be in financial distress. Is that some sort of mystery that we need to figure out, and we need some slide rule to figure that out? I mean, that's pretty basic to me. So we need to restore the local government funding. By the way, who are local? People say to me all the time, well, this isn't popular because people don't like government. People like local government. They understand that local government is in the community, face to face, dealing with our problems, delivering the local services that many people in our community depend upon, that raise the quality of life. That's local government to me. I am happy to make this case and push this around the state. But we need a partnership between the state and local government. We're never going to solve our problems by pitting state against local government and saying that you're to blame or you're the scapegoat. And by the way, what do local governments end up having to do? They have to go back to the ballot to make up the money, and it's property tax increases or income tax increases at the local level, as though they couldn't manage their own finances. Again, you reach into my pocket, take my money, I'm not going to be able to manage my finances very well. So those are some things that I object to. And then you also have the state government talking about how we need to solve new challenges like the opioid crisis, which is a huge challenge in Ohio. But how do you do that if you're not, how do local governments step up and deal with something extra when they don't even have the money to do what they've always done? I mean, that makes no sense to me. When I was in state government, our approach was different. When we had the foreclosure crisis, which was another thing that kind of washed over Ohio, and we didn't expect it, and it wasn't anticipated, we didn't understand it. Hadn't had a foreclosure crisis like that since the Depression. Okay, what did we do? We formed Save Our Homes task forces. This is what I did when I was treasurer, and we continued as attorney general. And who were they? It was state and local officials working together. It was bringing in our great nonprofits in the community that make such a difference to our quality of life, and leaders from the private sector that recognized there was a problem and were willing to step up to address it. Bringing people together, listening to each other, and focusing on how we could solve the problem. And we saved thousands of people's homes as a result. Not everybody's, but as many as we could. I call that the Ohio way. Bringing people together, creating partnerships, drawing on all our talents, and together finding ways to solve our problems. That's not been the philosophy of this current administration. It's not been the philosophy of the state legislature. It's something that needs to change. And one of the things that baffles me, and maybe you could help me on this, is most of the local officials in Ohio, especially at the county level, are Republicans. 75, 80 of the 88 counties, most of the local officials are Republican officials. Why aren't they speaking up about this? Somebody said to me last month that they're Vichy Republicans, which I didn't fully understand. I guess it's Vichy France during World War II, the ones who went over and collaborated with the Nazis. Felt a little strong, but I got the point. And I hope that over the course of this campaign, if we're loud enough and if we're consistent enough about this, that many of them will recognize, yeah, they'd like this to change too. I mean, yes, they're partisan, yes, they're party people, but at the same time, it's about making progress for Ohio. And to me, it's state and local government working together is always going to be the best way to solve our problems, and everything else just gets in the way. And that's what I see a lot of it. So, yeah.
I call it right to slavery. They call it right to work. What about that?
Well, there will be no right to work if I'm governor. It won't be. Legislature, I'll veto it. If they try to put it on the ballot, I'll fight to keep it off the ballot. If it goes on the ballot, we'll all work together to defeat it. And by the way, Ohio has done that before. Ohio defeated it in 1958 by 62% of the vote. We had Senate Bill 5 where we had to beat that at the ballot 7 years ago, and we beat that by 63% of the vote. So Ohio hasn't changed. We feel the same. They keep bringing this stuff at us, and now they're talking about putting right to work on the ballot in maybe 2019, 2020. I will be strongly opposed to that, and we will not allow that to happen in this state. Yeah. Now, you already asked one, so does anybody else have one?
I'll wait for this one.
Yes, go ahead.
Somewhat related to the question that this young lady had at my table, but centralized tax collection, and another
Yeah.
example
Yeah.
in Cleveland where the voters went to the ballot to raise minimum wage.
Yep.
And the states came back and said you're preempted. What
Yeah.
is your position on preemption and home rule?
Yeah, let me, a couple different things you raised. So, first of all, it's not just the local government fund. Pretty much everything the state legislature has touched involving local government's gotten the short end of the stick. Whether it was the MCOs, where local government got a bad deal on that, or whether it's this centralized tax collection, where now they want to do all the tax collection for you, and you're not necessarily going to be able to know how they did it, whether they got it right. I mean, their record on charter schools has been pretty poor in terms of their accountability and management. So I'm not generally in favor of that. I think taxes should be collected locally. I'm not even sure they'll understand all the ins and outs of the different jurisdictional boundaries, which can be pretty intricate in a local place. So in terms of preemption, I am generally in favor of home rule. Now, we had a couple cases when I was state attorney general where my job was to represent the legislative statutes, and where those were what they were, we had to represent those in the Ohio Supreme Court. But in terms of, I saw predatory lending ordinances that Dayton, Toledo, and Cleveland enacted, and the state legislature stopped them and said, we're not going to do anything, but you're not allowed to do anything either. Minimum wage, that's another thing that could vary from one place to another, because in Cleveland maybe they might pay a different wage than they might in Zanesville. But although I also believe that we should go to the ballot and raise the minimum wage statewide, and I think that would be a good thing. I don't think it would cost us jobs. I think it would create demand. And I think that people who work for a living deserve to have a sufficient wage that they can sustain themselves and raise a family. And I think that that's only fair in our society. So anyway, those are my thoughts about those issues. Anything else? Yeah.
How do you stand on Veterans Affairs?
How do I stand on Veterans Affairs? When I was the state treasurer, I was the one that created and pushed for the Veterans Service Bonus for the people who served in Iraq and the Persian Gulf and Afghanistan. Did you get that?
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, okay. I did that, so don't forget. I initiated it. The people voted for it, the people approved it, and then it all went from there. But look, I would say several things. Number one, all of us owe a debt of gratitude to everyone who has risked their lives or taken their time to serve our country, and most of all, those in uniform. I felt a small reflection of that working at the Consumer Bureau because I was serving our country, on a national level. But the people who serve our country and risk to protect our rights and our way of life are special. And we should have a strong veterans preference in terms of state government employment. We should encourage that in the private sector as well. As a veteran, the kind of leadership skills that you learn in military service and the ability to cope with lots of different kinds of situations, as well as a lot of technical skills. In fact, I was talking 2 days ago to folks from the clean energy, alternative energy industries, wind and solar and so forth. And they said they hire a lot of veterans because they have a lot of skills that they've developed, just dealing with all the different, fixing lots of things that you have to do when you're in the field. You just have to cope with the situations, right? And you learn to do that and you figure out how to do that. That's a great adaptability and versatility that veterans bring to the job. So anyway, that's how I feel. Yeah. And when I was at the Bureau, we actually had an Office of Service Member Affairs which was active duty service members, but we expanded it to their families and to veterans and their families as well. And the person running that was Holly Petraeus, David Petraeus' wife, who was first class, first rate, and she found all kinds of ways to solve problems for veterans and their families in terms of military service deployments and how that affected the ability to buy or sell a house. All the predatory lending that goes on around our bases. You have all these young people that go into the military away from home for the first time, guaranteed paycheck, and people are all over them. You could tell me with terrible auto loans and terrible payday loans and other things, and we worked to stamp that out. We had a great action on behalf of one young service member whose father was upset at the terrible car loan his son got into, and he complained to everybody and nobody was paying attention. He complained to the Bureau, and we turned that into an enforcement action and got thousands of dollars back for him and for 1,600 other service members as a result. So, yeah, we were proud to have the chance to do that work. So, and we can do that in state government as well. Now, back to you. Yes, sir. Question number 2.
Two other items that are glaring problems here in Ohio. You know, there was just a Supreme Court action in Pennsylvania to try to straighten out the deep redistricting.
Yep.
We live in the 4th district that they, say looks like a duck because it looks like a duck. It was created by our local politician to some degree in Matt Huffman. But do you think that the work that is going on, the direction that's going on now for redistricting in Ohio is something that will be functional and operate properly? And the other question I have, it's been
question number 3
forever. About the DeRolf decision on school funds.
All right. First one on the redistricting. The old saying, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's time we quack down on gerrymandering. We have the legislature with a tussle adopted a new way of drawing the districts for the state legislature, which seems to be reasonably fair, but we'll see when it comes to it in 2020. And they just now agreed on a bipartisan proposal, a very rare thing for this legislature, bipartisan proposal for redistricting on the congressional districts that's going to go on the ballot in May. And people are fairly satisfied with it. It's likely to get us fairer maps. We have terrible maps right now. The one you described is not by any means the worst of it. There's this big sort of string along the lake from it's almost like a barbell. There's a bunch in Toledo and there's a bunch over in Cleveland and this whole string along the lake. None of it makes any sense except they plug into the computer and they plug in the partisan indexes, and it's all about politicians choosing their voters rather than voters choosing their office holders, and it's wrong. So I believe that this the measure is going to be on in May is going to have broad support. It's going to represent progress. That didn't happen out of the goodness of anybody's heart. It happened because there was a competing ballot measure that would have gone on in the fall that people were worried about, and that created the leverage to get this legislature to do what it doesn't normally do, which is get together and compromise. So, but I'm going to be supportive of that. I think most everybody should be supportive of that. It also keeps the governor as having a role in the redistricting, which will be important to balance the legislative members of that. And I think that we will do better in Ohio for the first time in decades in terms of having maps where we will have more competitive elections, and therefore who will benefit by that? The voters and the public, and that's who should benefit. We're supposed to be the ones in charge, not them.
Right.
So, and then on the DeRolf decision, that's a much longer question to answer, but the DeRolf decision is the case that was in the Ohio Supreme Court a number of years ago declaring Ohio's school funding system unconstitutional, violating the Ohio Constitution's thorough and efficient clause because it was too uneven from one part of the state to another in terms of how much support was given to students and how much was not given to students. And the basic principle of unfairness there is it shouldn't matter which zip code you're born into in terms of what opportunity you're going to have in school K through 12 and on your way to having opportunity in life. There's 2 pieces to that. I would say one is school facilities, and we used to be 49th in the nation in school facilities. We've actually made a lot of progress on that. And the Ohio Facilities and Construction Commission funded in part by stuff that we did when I was state treasurer to speed up the securitization of tobacco proceeds, which put billions of dollars into that program, has helped. The other side of it, the operational funding for our schools, has never followed. The legislature's never followed through on that. They've never had the will to step up and put education first in the budget. That is something I hope that and expect that Betty Sutton and I can do better on, working with the legislature. It's still going to be a Republican legislature probably at least for the first 2 to 4 years in order to make progress on that, and I believe we will. So I'm a public school graduate myself. Our twins just graduated from the public schools, same district in Southwestern City Schools in Franklin County. And the public schools do some terrific work, especially if we stop siphoning off money to the for-profit charter schools. That just makes it harder for people to do their jobs in the classroom. So, did you have something, Miss?
Yeah, well, what's your stand on the gun laws? That seems to be a current issue.
Yeah, yeah, it is a current issue. Look, anybody who saw that Parkland shooting, and there have been several before that, anybody who's a parent, and my kids, although they're graduated, they're still teenagers, you know, you feel that. 3 different things I would say that we're trying to do. First of all, we're trying to focus on concrete, practical proposals that will actually save lives. So, number 1, we do need to tighten the gun laws, and I've argued for universal background checks. The one important thing is not having guns fall into the wrong hands, okay? And it's happening all the time in our society now. And by the way, when people engage in straw purchases to buy guns for people who aren't allowed to have them, that needs to be prosecuted severely. And the theft of guns, which is another way they fall into the wrong hands, needs to be prosecuted severely. And anything that takes a legal firearm and turns it into an illegal automatic weapon, like the bump stocks, the high-capacity magazine clips, we need to ban those. And whatever else they may dream up along those lines, we need to ban that as well. Second, for the safety of our schools, there's different approaches people are taking in different parts of this state and parts of this country. My view and the Fraternal Order of Police is of a similar view is, let's have our schools have a single entrance and exit, and let's enforce that strictly. Have school resource officers, which will have to provide some state funding for that at the local level, who can be almost like neighborhood watch in that school. They get to know the student body. They can man the entrance and exit. They can see who's coming in, what they're bringing in, make sure that it's appropriate, and keep out what's not. That was what was done at my kids' high school, and it worked quite well. And people were very comfortable with it. And by the way, the students really got to know the school resource officer. He was pretty beloved, and he was able to have a good sense of what was going on. And then the third thing is, it's not just schools. It's in our communities, it's the gun violence on our streets, you know, it's people being shot in drive-by shootings. And by the way, you know, this has been true in a lot of communities in the state for a long time, and nobody seemed to care. And now they're caring more. But this has always been something we need to work on. Intervening with the gangs is something that some of the city police departments are doing, which is effective, because a lot of weaponry finds its way onto the streets through gangs and gang violence. Intervening with people who have been known to commit crimes with guns. Again, enforcing the background checks to keep guns out of the wrong hands. These are some of the things I think we could do right now, and I think we'd have a chance of actually making a difference to save lives. So that's sort of been my reaction to this point. I'm listening and watching and hearing a lot from this around the state on all sides of the issue. People have very different views on this issue, but I do think we can do more, and we should. So, yes.
Sounds like you're not in favor of the teachers packing.
That hasn't been, my approach has been different from that. You know, I think that if we have a school resource officer who can actually man a single point of ingress and egress, that does a lot. There are counties around here, and in fact, I have a friend who's a sheriff of one of them, where they aren't arming all the teachers in the school, but they have specific places in the school where certain teachers are trained, and there's a lockbox with a gun in it if they need to get at it. I don't know what I think of that. That has not been my approach at this point. I'm a little worried, and the officers worry that they'll come to the school and they won't know who the good guys and bad guys are, and there'll be a bunch of them with guns. That could be a mess. So I'm not sure what to think of that. But I'm listening to people and trying to understand what they're doing in different parts of the state. And maybe it's different in a more rural area where the response time is going to be slower than maybe it would be in an urban area. And you know, maybe that's a difference. I just haven't figured all that out yet. So. Yes, you
How
again.
do you feel about outsourcing the prisons?
Yeah, I don't believe in taking public services and outsourcing them. It's supposed to save us all this money. I don't think it does. There's a lot of profiteering that occurs, and the quality of services is
Yeah.
diminished. So I was against private prisons all the way back when I first ran for Attorney General in 1998. We had our first private prison at that time in the Youngstown area, and we used to go up there and hold a press conference at that place about every month. Didn't matter. They were bent on doing that, so they proceeded with that. I don't believe in that, and I think public services should be publicly run, publicly operated, publicly
Amen.
publicly
Yeah.
accountable. So,
I would
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for waiting and patiently, and thank you for being here. And I would hope and ask for your support in the governor's race for Rich Cordray and Betty Sutton, and I would hope that you will do your best to pass the word, okay? Because we do have a primary. Early voting will be starting in just a few weeks, and so don't wait till October to get busy. Get busy now and help us. Thank you. Thank you.